The Tale of the Acrobat Who Did Not Want to Get Off His Trapeze Ever Again, from Chapter 13. Remy Rorschach's life, as narrated in a volume of memoirs ghosted for him with the indulgence by a writer specializing in that kind of service, is a painful combination of courage and error. He began his career at the end of the 1914-18 war in a Marseille music hall doing impressions of Max Linder and other American comedians. A tall, thin man with melancholy, heartbroken gestures and expressions which could indeed remind you of Keaton, Lloyd, or Laurel, Rorschach might have made a name for himself if he hadn't been a few years before his time. The fashion was for soldier comedians, and whilst the crowds flocked to Fernando, Gabin, and Prégine, soon to be made famous by films Harry Cobbins, that was the name he'd taken, mouldered in miserable poverty and found it harder and harder to get his act taken on. What with the war just over, the recent national unity government, and the sky-blue conservative victory at the elections, he got the idea of founding a group specializing in rousing brass flourishes, military tunes from Tipperary, square dances, and a kit bag of similar amenities. A photo from this period shows him with his band, Albert Greenfield and his Jolly Rogers, wearing a cocky look, a fake kepi tied to one side, a broad-frogged combat jacket, and impeccably tight puttees. It was an instant success, but lasted only a few weeks. The invasion of the Paso Doble, the foxtrot, the beguine, and other exotic dances from North, South, and Central America and elsewhere closed to him the doors of dance halls and night spots, and his valiant efforts to adapt, Barry Jefferson and his Hot Pepper 7, Paco Domingo and the Three Caballeros, Fedor Kowalski and his Magyar minstrels, Alberto Sforzi and his gondoliers, all failed in succession. In fact, he recalls on this point only names and headgear changed. The act stayed virtually the same, as they were happy enough to make slight changes of tempo, to swap a guitar for balalaika, a banjo or mandolin, and to utter the appropriate baby, ole, tovarek, mio amor, or corazon, occasionally with meaning. Shortly after this, dejected, his mind made up to abandon the performing arts, but not wishing to leave the world of show business, Rorschach became the manager of an acrobat, a trapeze artist who had rapidly become a celebrity because of two features. The first, that he was very young. Rorschach met him when he was not yet 12. And the second was his talent for staying on his trapeze for hours at a stretch. Crowds flocked to the music halls and circuses where he was on, not only to see him do his act, but to watch him napping, washing, dressing, or drinking a cup of chocolate on the narrow bar of his trapeze, 90 or 100 feet from the ground. At the start of the partnership flourished, and all the major cities of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East applauded the amazing feats of the young man. But as he grew older, the trapeze artist became more and more demanding, at first purely out of a desire to improve, but subsequently from the tyranny of habit as well. So organized his life that, for as long as he was working in one establishment, he spent his whole time, day and night, on his trapeze. His very modest needs were all met by relays of servants who kept watch below, and who raised and lowered everything required up above in specially constructed containers. His way of life occasioned no particular difficulties as far as those around him were concerned, except that, during the other acts of the program, it was slightly disturbing that he stayed aloft. The fact could not be concealed, and that the audience, though it usually remained calm, let its gaze stray in his direction. The management forgave him this, however, because he was an outstanding and irreplaceable artist. Also, of course, they appreciated that he did not live like that out of mischief, and that it was in fact the only way he could keep himself in constant form and maintain his act at the level of perfection. The problem was harder to manage when his season ended and the trapeze artist had to travel to another town. His manager saw to it that he was spared any unnecessary prolongation of his sufferings. For trips in towns, they usually used racing cars, dashing if possible at night or in the very early morning through the deserted streets at top speed, though of course still too slowly for the languishing trapeze artist. In trains, they took a whole compartment, where, adopting a pathetic but at least partial substitute for his normal way of life, He spent the journey up in the luggage rack. In the next theater, or in their tour, the trapeze was in place long before the acrobat's arrival, and all the doors between them and the auditorium were wide open, and all the corridors clear, so that he could be back up on high without losing a second. Seeing him set foot on the rope ladder, Rorschach wrote, and climb back up to his eyrie with the speed of lightning were the happiest moments of my life. The day came, alas, when the artist refused to come down from his trapeze. He had just done his last performance at the Grand Theatre at Leghorn and was due to leave that evening by car for Tarbes. Despite Rorschach's and the music hall's manager pleading, increasingly hysterical appeals from the other members of the troupe, from the musicians, the entire staff, the technicians, and from the crowds who had begun to leave but had stopped and returned on hearing all this noise, the acrobat, in a fit of pride, cut the rope he could have come down on, and began to perform, at ever faster pace, an uninterrupted succession of grand circles. This supreme performance lasted 2 hours and caused 53 spectators to pass out. The police had to be brought in. In spite of Rorschach's warning, the policemen brought a long fire ladder and began to climb up. They didn't even get halfway. The trapeze artist opened his grip and, with a long scream, describing a perfect parabola, he crashed to the ground.